generally going and attacking Indian dairy owners in small parts of, well, if anyone did it to our dairy owners in Hunua, the entire community would be on their back. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's part of the community, whereas I think there's this complete disconnect now, isn't there, in some parts of urban Auckland, especially where, people they don't see other people as human beings, let alone, and I mean, a lot of the kids are whacked on drugs and stuff as well. So it's just, there is no easy solution, unfortunately, but you have definitely got a generation of young people who, I see them walking up the streets of Papakura, and they just, I sometimes cross the road because you just feel physically intimidated being around that. And yet these are kids who are probably only 15 or 16. So something's clearly gone haywire for them to be like that at that age.
On a brighter note, by the way, Brodie Retallick's great aunt is the...
is Mrs. Retallick?
Well, no, I'm not saying that as gospel, but that's what is being suggested.
Well, that would make sense.
And other people know of her teaching too. A fascinating theory about who the people are behind the WannaCry random wear attacks. Maybe it isn't the North Koreans. Hello, in Wanaka. In Wanaka we have Wanna Taxi, we have Wanna Clean Dog, etc. And Wanna is a popular prefix for business names. And I think WannaCry may have come from here by someone angry that snow hasn't yet arrived in the deep south. That person is bored and taking it out on the rest of us. It's a plausible sort of suggestion, isn't it? Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says it won't be him selling the ports of Auckland. It'll be a decision by council if that happens. He does say he'd like to see the port shifted. It is said that there have been high-level discussions about selling ports of Auckland in an IPO to raise $500 million and pay for Auckland infrastructure without having to go back on promises of rates rises of 2.5% and such. If you look at this simply, is it, we can't afford to pay for everything we need to do in Auckland, so this is what we've come up with? Is this how you see this?
Do you know, I think it is as simple as that. I was thinking about that during the day, is what's the strategic interest in owning a port if you're a city council? And there's presumably plenty of examples around the world where ports are privately owned. You make sure that you own the land, that's probably the critical piece, and you make sure you've got very good environmental controls, and you probably make sure the port actually reports not just profit, but also thinks about its social impact and its environmental impact. And that would seem to me you don't actually need to own the thing to get that kind of control. So I'd sell it.
Except for then once you've got nothing left to sell, then you're, I hate to say it, completely screwed.
Well, it depends what you do with the money. Because if you invest that money into other infrastructure, then you've got other things you might sell down the track.
What they could do is they could sell the port and invest in Auckland property. That'd be a winner.
For school teachers. Now, that's a great idea.
They would be like making $100,000 on every house within, they could buy the port back a following year and bank them. I don't know.
Now, that's a great idea.
Councillor Mike Lee says the land underneath it isn't worth anything really. It's reclaimed rubble. I think I saw him quoted words to that effect. Now, it is really hot under the Southern Alps. Just to close, you've probably seen the story today. Extreme geothermal conditions deep beneath the mountains. This is in the journal Nature. The tests were done near Whataroa on the west coast.
Is it going to blow?
No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, good. Phew.
No. So commercial possibilities exist here, apparently a geothermal power plant, hot springs for tourists and so on. Nothing to worry about, they say. But doesn't it sound a bit scary? Did you read this and think, why is it so hot under the Southern Alps?
No, but I saw the connection between that and the story about Wanaka and the snow not coming. Maybe it's because the earth's warmed up too much.
Ah, that's interesting.
I blame Donald Trump.
Yeah.
It was him.
Very good to have both of you on the panel. Interesting connection between Wanaka and the Southern Alps. Love that one. Chris Clark, thank you. And Linda, Helen and you too.
Thank you.
Thanks for your company, everybody. The panel is, of course, back tomorrow. And Checkpoints with John Campbell is along round about now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, Detective Inspector Whaamanuia Elua on the 4 youths responsible for yet another aggravated robbery of an Auckland dairy. Uneducated cowards, dumb, gutless, stupid idiots, violent imbeciles who should be ashamed of themselves. Also tonight, Donald Trump makes investors nervous, Grant Dalton on Team New Zealand's chances, and the Prime Minister, who grew up on a sheep farm, visits one in Japan as Japan embraces TPP. An earthquake research project on the Southern Alps becomes a world-first scientific discovery, and a warning for mobile phone users after a couple gets a $31,000 bill for roaming on 6 devices during their holiday. Checkpoint coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batanaho. An Auckland police detective investigating a spate of violent robberies is calling the offenders gutless imbeciles who lack honour and integrity. A Mangere dairy owner is recovering after being attacked at knife point on Tuesday evening. It's the latest in a series of dairy robberies in Auckland, and Detective Inspector Whaamunua Va'alua says the violence towards the shop owners is sickening.
These people have used excessive violence on innocent people who were totally willing to comply with their demands. These offenders should be ashamed because they have no pride or honour. These thugs are dangerous, violent, and they need to be held to account.
Whaamunua Va'alua says people should step in if they suspect family members are involved. A coroner has found that a West Auckland teenager who died after being punched at a rugby training session had an underlying heart problem and died when the stress of the assault induced a heart attack. Stephen Dudley died in June 2013 after a pair of brothers he went to school with attacked him. Eva Corlett reports.
The 15-year-old had just finished training when a teammate picked a fight. The teammate's older brother then joined in, punching his throat once and his body many times. Stephen collapsed on the field, and despite CPR attempts by emergency services, he died in hospital less than 2 hours later. The two brothers charged over his death were discharged without conviction and with permanent name suppression. In a report just released, the coroner recommends the school in question develop a CPR training program and says that the Ministry of Education should form guidelines on the use of defibrillators. Ko Eva Corlett, Tēnei.
The Immigration Minister says the points system that encourages immigrants to settle and work in the regions is attracting hundreds of people. 2 years ago, the government started giving triple bonus points to immigrants with a job offer in the regions as long as they stayed there for at least a year. The Labour Party leader, Andrew Little, says the system should be reviewed because there's anecdotal evidence migrants are moving to Auckland as soon as the year is up. The Minister, Michael Woodhouse, says that isn't the case.
There is absolutely no evidence that that's occurring, and indeed quite the opposite. There could be anecdotal evidence that I see of people, recent migrants moving out of Auckland and coming down to the South Island where I live. That's an anecdote. It's no less anecdotal than what Mr Little is saying.
The Immigration Minister, Michael Woodhouse. Edgecombe families whose homes were flooded will be able to apply for portable cabins to be set up on their own land. More than 250 houses in the Bay of Plenty town were damaged when the Rangitaiki River overflowed last month. The government says about 30 temporary homes will be set up at the Whakatane Holiday Park or, where suitable, next to the houses being repaired. It says 90 families have so far registered for support in finding temporary accommodation. The Ministry of Health is taking tobacco giant Philip Morris to court over its tobacco sticks known as Heats. The product, launched 5 months ago, is heated in an electronic device instead of being burned like a traditional cigarette. The ministry says the sticks are designed for oral use instead of smoking, and that's illegal under the Smoke-Free Environments Act. It says the product doesn't qualify as an e-cigarette because it involves heated tobacco, not a solution or e-liquid that produces vapour. The initial hearing will be in the Wellington District Court early next month. Firefighters are still trying to put out a fire that sent black smoke billowing from the top of a high-rise building in central Auckland this afternoon. The fire service says construction workers renovating a 21-storey building on the corner of Queen Street and Merrill Drive were cutting into a metal box on the roof when they saw smoke coming out from it. One of the workers, Michael Youngman, says he was on the 12th floor when the fire broke out.
We're working up in the building doing, renovation work and that, plumbing and that, and then we 3 calls a siren and we just walked down the stairs, came out and the building was ablaze.
Michael Youngman. The fire service says the internal water supply isn't working, so hoses are having to be run up to the top floors. Everyone who was in the building has been accounted for. It's 5:04. Sport Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd says the need to rest a few players is the reason for dropping fullback Jordie Barrett to the bench for Saturday's Super Rugby game against the Cheetahs in Wellington. Teddy Black gets his second start of the season at first 5 and Beauden Barrett replaces his brother. Boyd says because of injuries to others, Jordie Barrett has played more this season than he would have liked.
The change to give O'Terry a run at 10 was twofold really, to give him some minutes and keep him ticking over, and also to give Geordie a few less minutes, and he's a young man that's come into this environment that we've made a decision that he could do without starting this week.
Chris Boyd. Meanwhile, Lima Sapoanga is set for his first Super Rugby game in more than 2 months after being named on the Highlanders bench for their clash with the Western Force in Perth. He's joined in the reserves by Aaron Smith, while second-choice halfback Kane Hamilton gets his first start. Nelson cyclist George Bennett has continued his strong performance on the Tour of California, holding on to second place overall after the fourth stage, just 2 seconds off the lead. He finished 16th on the latest stage. The defending NBA champions, the Cleveland Cavaliers, have beaten the Boston Celtics 117-104 in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference basketball finals. Golden State lead San Antonio 2-0 in the West. That's the news.
The paper of Watergate predicts Trump's demise.
No Trump officials today were appearing on camera, were answering questions directly. I mean, they've sort of gone into hiding right now, and it's an indication of, I think, how alarmed they are.
An ex-FBI boss says the allegations are coming in waves.
We are just hit by wave after wave of very concerning news.
But Donald Trump tries to turn back the tide.
You can't let them get you down. You can't let the critics and the naysayers get in the way of your dreams.
Trump that. Guy and Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, is New Zealand's special bond with Australia a thing of the past? And after 10, father and daughter beatboxers Nicole Paris and Ed Cage, and the extraordinary sounds they can make. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island except Wellington and southern Wairarapa. A few showers clearing from Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and northern Wairarapa this evening. Showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow morning. Wellington and southern Wairarapa cloudy, a period of rain overnight tonight and again tomorrow night. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine, but a period of rain tonight and again tomorrow night with snow above 400 metres. Westland and Buller, rain spreading north this evening, followed by showers, some heavy with snow above 600 metres, clearing tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, rain developing by evening, followed by showers, some possibly heavy, snow lowering to 600 metres tonight and to low levels later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, periods of rain, possibly heavy and thundery, especially overnight tonight. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Coming up on the program tonight, scientists researching earthquakes accidentally discover a geothermal resource on the South Island's west coast. Japan embraces a post-American TPP and takes billing to a sheep farm. And our reporter Chris Bramwell and the BBC's John Sopel with the latest on the helter-skelter presidency of Donald Trump. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. We begin tonight in Auckland in the aggravated robbery of a superette in Mangere on Tuesday night. Just how aggravated it actually was became shockingly clear today when police released CCTV footage. Police also released figures showing there have been 68 arrests for aggravated robbery in Auckland since February. 68. And Detective Inspector Fa'amanuia Va'aelua said everyone has had a gutsful. Zach Fleming and our cameraman Brad White have been covering the aggravated robberies, many for cigarettes, as we have reported over the past couple of weeks. They went to talk to the latest victim, Vikas Singh, who is so fearful of his assailants he asked for his face not to be shown.
Police are describing it as a sickening, violent attack by uneducated cowards.
They're dumb, gutless, stupid idiots and only behave violently when they're in groups.
And this is what Detective Inspector Fa'amanuia Va'aelua is talking about. It's 7:30 on Tuesday night. Vikas Singh's shift is nearly over. He's stacking shelves at the Kingsford supermarket in Mangere, like he's done for the past 10 months, when 4 men, 2 armed with machetes, storm in.
They hit me on my head, so after that I was totally unconscious and fell down on the floor. So after that, I don't know, they punching on my face and nose, but I don't remember. But after a few minutes, I just got up and I see the guy put a knife on my neck and they just asking for the money.
What Vikas felt was a few minutes was actually seconds. The entire thing was over quicker than his description, taking just 28 seconds. but it's had a lasting impact on Vikas. His nose is likely broken. You'll notice he sounds like he has a cold. He has bruises to his face and body and a cut on his neck from the machete. But then there's the emotional impact. Vikas is so shaken and so scared, he asked us to blur his face for fear of retribution.
Never imagined that could happen with us. No, I think totally unsafe for us.
Do you think you'll go back to work there?
Yeah, I have no option, I have to go over there. I need a job, I have no another option.
The Kingsford supermarket serves a quiet residential neighbourhood in Mangere. Across the road is a church, next to that a primary school, and around the corner a children's play care centre and some sports fields. Locals say this kind of trouble is rare here. Employees and owners of liquor stores, dairies and petrol stations say they believe robberies are becoming more frequent and more violent. Like Vikas, many have told Checkpoint they no longer feel safe at work. A short time ago, Counties Manukau Police held a press conference about the robbery on Tuesday.
We ask the families to really work with the police. We can't keep arresting people, and we can't arrest ourselves out of the situation. Our numbers of arrests in recent months have shown that we clearly have enough police to deal with these arrests and these offenders.
At the end of the day, it's police's job to catch criminals. There's little they can do to deter them. So a collective of owners and workers called the Crime Prevention Group is considering a mass hunger strike because they say the government is ignoring them and their plight. They want more police, more boots on the ground and harsher punishments. Kamaljit Singh is the owner of the Kingsford supermarket.
At the end of the day, not much happens, like punishment-wise, it's basically a slap on the hand, naughty boy, don't do this again.
So we asked Justice Minister Amy Adams what, if anything, is being done. She declined our request for an interview, but in a statement said aggravated robbery carries a maximum of 14 years in prison, which reflects the seriousness of the offence. But all of this frustration and debate is little consolation for Vikas. He hasn't even told his mother and father back home in India what's happened.
I don't want to, put into any kind of tension or stress, so that's why.
So not only have these men come in and done this to you, you feel like you can't even talk to your mum and dad about it?
No. Just my brother.
Vikas's brother took yesterday off work to look after him. He also works behind a counter at a Z petrol station and also feels unsafe due to what he says is rising crime. Both brothers say they came to New Zealand 3 years ago full of hope, to study and get good jobs and make their family proud. I asked Vikas what he thinks now.
I think this is totally unsafe, now New Zealand going to be unsafe. Before coming, I heard that New Zealand is a very peaceful country. But now the picture is different,
Your world has been shattered, essentially.
Yeah.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And we will hear more from the detective inspector in charge of this case later in the programme. Donald Trump is still saying nothing to see here, but today a special prosecutor was appointed to decide that, taking over the investigation into Russian interference in the US election. The Justice Department selected former FBI head Robert Mueller to lead the politically charged investigation. That met with bipartisan approval. There hasn't been much of that lately. However, it's not clear if you'll look into the latest in a series of explosive reports out of Washington that Mr. Trump asked the now ousted FBI Director James Comey back in February to shut down an investigation into ties between his national security advisor Michael Flynn and Russia. Here's the BBC's John Sopel.
Donald Trump was en route to the US Coast Guard Academy as his own administration seemed to be listing at a precarious angle.
Our Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump. Thank you very much.
This has been the most torrid week of this young presidency, and though he didn't address each individual setback, there was an unmistakable message.
No politician in history, and I say this with great surety, has been treated worse or more unfairly. You can't let them get you down. I didn't get elected to serve the Washington media or special interests. I got elected to serve the forgotten men and women of our country, and that's what I'm doing. He's become more famous than me.
But forget the media. Far and away his biggest problem comes from the sacked FBI director James Comey. The disclosure that he's kept detailed notes of all his meetings with the president, including over the sacked National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, is super serious. Donald Trump is reported to have said to Comey, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Comey is said to have replied, "I agree, he's a good guy." Amid allegations that this amounted to obstruction of justice, the White House denied any wrongdoing, saying the president hadn't told the FBI director to stop his work. It brought this rejoinder from the Democratic leader on the floor of the Senate.
The president says what Comey said was wrong. Prove it. It's easy to prove, as long as there are tapes or transcripts of what happened. If the president's right, he'll have no problem releasing memos, tapes, transcripts that corroborate his story.
And other Democrats have started using the I word.
To call for the impeachment of the President of the United States of America for obstruction of justice.
This is not good for America.
And some highly influential Republicans too are growing restive, with comparisons being made to the dog days of Nixon.
I think we've seen this movie before. I think it's reaching the point where it's of Watergate size and scale and a couple of other scandals that you and I have seen.
It's been a calamitous week. Last Tuesday came the shock firing of James Comey, with the White House giving muddled explanations about why. Then on Friday, the president seemed to threaten his former FBI director with a tweet saying, "James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press." And this Monday it emerged that the president divulged highly classified material to the Russian foreign minister when he visited the White House. The president, who returned to the White House, will be buoyed by the support he continues to enjoy in the country. But that's what gets you elected, not what keeps you in power. And this administration can't afford any more weeks like the one that's just gone.
The BBC's John Sopel. And the week's tumultuous events have made investors nervous. The Dow Jones suffered its biggest one-day fall since Donald Trump was elected. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ, coming up to 18 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us. Ahead on the program, an earthquake research project on the Southern Alps becomes a world-first scientific discovery. Grant Dalton on pressure, red mist and New Zealand's chances at the America's Cup after yesterday's collision. And a warning for mobile phone users: if you take them overseas, turn the roaming off. $31,000 the bill in this case. That's coming up. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And we are on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Face TV, Sky Channel 83. Japan has surprised the New Zealand government by throwing its weight behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership, meaning the trade deal is now live again after essentially being dead in the water. A mixed response to that from your emails that have come in so far. US President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the controversial trade pact earlier this year. The Prime Minister, Bill English, met with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe late last night in Tokyo, and the two leaders emerged from the talks both fully committed to the deal going ahead. That does mean if the other 9 remaining countries agree, the TPP could be in force early next year. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell, is in Japan. I asked her about the country's commitment to the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal.
We all thought the TPP was floundering. Some people thought it was dead in the water. But the Prime Minister, Bill English, really is crediting this change in heart to his Trade Minister, Todd McClay. Todd McClay has been getting around the region, talking to various countries. He arrived in Tokyo on Sunday and spent some time talking to officials, also his counterpart, the Trade Minister, there on Monday. And actually, Todd McClay said that Shinzo Abe's words actually took him by surprise. He was surprised by how much the leadership moved, and so was English. He said they got much more progress than they expected going into the meeting. So I think for Japan, there's a couple of things there. One is that they want the deal to be in place so that the United States can come back at some point in the future. They're pretty much banking on that to be, I guess, when Trump leaves at some point. The other part of it for Japan, which is critical for them, is that it's around stability and security in the region. So the TPP is, yes, a trade deal, but it's also a strategic deal. So what it means is that there'll be a bunch of like-minded countries around the region working together on trade, and that also provides security for Japan, which of course is feeling quite nervous about North Korea, and that's the main focus of its need and its want to have security in the region.
Chris, that's absolutely fascinating, and as you say, it's such a big turn from where Japan was only a few days ago. Can I please now lower the tone of the conversation entirely? Because I have the advantage of seeing you, but if people are travelling home in their cars or whatever, can you please describe where you are?
So I'm on the northern island of Hokkaido on the outskirts of Sapporo, standing in a paddock which is full of sheep. So this is an exhibition farm in Hokkaido running about 1,300 stock units. And I tell you, it looks and it sounds and it smells like a New Zealand sheep farm. It's quite amazing. When we turned in the gate, and I grew up on a sheep farm, we turned into the gate and I was like, boy, this is familiar. The only thing is it's spring, so it's full of lambs. So yeah, here I am standing, and yesterday I talked to you from downtown Tokyo with the metro running behind me, and here I am today in a paddock with sheep.
You grew up on a sheep farm, so did the Prime Minister, of course, in Southland. So why did your lovely Japanese hosts take a whole lot of New Zealanders to a exhibition sheep farm?
Well, I mean, I think it was pretty much driven by the New Zealanders because, A, it's good media for them to have the Prime Minister here, you know, at the sheep farm. But the other thing is actually around the TPP, because for a lot of the resistance from Japan was from the agricultural lobby. They were fearful of the commodities flooding in here, the sheep meat, the beef meat, undermining their businesses. So part of this really is a bit of a sweetener. So it's pretty much Bill English and Todd McClay here saying, look, you know, yes, there is going to be competition around commodities, but actually we can provide you with technology and services to help you grow your product more efficiently, be more productive. So there are pluses in this for you. So that's certainly, I think, a bit of a sweetening trip here as well.
Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell. We will, of course, look at the TPP and what it will be without America. Redesigned, how much? Scientists have accidentally discovered a geothermal resource on the South Island's west coast which could completely rejuvenate the area's economy, potentially. While drilling on the Alpine Fault for their research into earthquakes, scientists encountered extreme heat less than a kilometre from the surface, over 3 times what they expected. Logan Church reports.
What started off as an earthquake research project on the Southern Alps has turned into a world-first scientific discovery. A team of over 120 scientists from 12 countries have stumbled on what could be a self-replenishing energy source near Whataroa in Westland. The researchers were drilling nearly 900 metres underground in an effort to better understand the Alpine Fault, when they discovered extreme heat 3 times hotter than expected. The lead scientist of the Westland Deep Fault Drilling Project, Professor Rupert Sutherland, says the discovery was completely unexpected.
We've potentially just stumbled upon an enormous geothermal resource, and it couldn't be more perfectly positioned, really, because it uses all of the same technology and people skills that are currently used in the mining industry, which, of course, is one of the big industries that's had difficult times on the West Coast.
Mr. Sutherland says the heat is created naturally due to the friction caused by water running through fractured rocks in the fault line. He says this means the heat energy replenishes itself. Westland's Mayor, Bruce Smith, says if this resource could be used, it would turn the region's economy around.
Whataroa was one of the 2 towns most impacted by the cessation of logging. It's a town that's really struggled to find its feet again after. Something like this would turn the place on its ear. It would create a boost to the West Coast economy that would not have been seen in our lifetime before.
And one of the scientists on the project, Dr. Virginia Toy, says it wouldn't be hard to build the infrastructure required to start generating electricity.
I don't think it would be difficult to use it to generate electricity. It's a question of what you use the electricity for. Because there's only a small community of people on the West Coast, so you don't really just want to power houses. You need to think strategically about really good uses for it.
Bruce Smith says the economic opportunities are endless.
You can think about geothermal electricity, horticulture, tourism with hot pools, heating, growing prawns. There's such a range of activities that can occur on a commercial basis when you've got a source of energy like they've discovered.
But Rupert Sutherland says there are still risks that need to be assessed, given how close they are drilling to the fault line.
Geothermal energy in general has been known to induce earthquakes. There's some quite famous examples, as has hydroelectricity. So, in fact, nearly all of the energy systems that we currently use have some type of relationship to earthquakes.
Mr. Sutherland says he has prepared a business case for building an electrical generator and is expecting to hear from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment later this year. For Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tene.
Lots of feedback coming in on robberies, aggravated robberies in Auckland. 68 arrests since February for aggravated robberies, and quite a few of them have yet to be solved. What are you suggesting? Superette robberies. We all agree it's a community problem that's falling on small business owners and workers. How about we as taxpayers subsidise installation of fog machines into at-risk shops? When the panic button is activated, the shop fills with fog and the robbers have to flee as they can't see anything. Quite a few people talking, and this is from Donna Wind in Otahu, who's saying, when is someone going to notice the growth of off-licence alcohol outlets in South Auckland and the spate of robberies in shops that sell liquor? To the best of my knowledge, the District Licensing Committee has never refused an alcohol off-licence in South Auckland, despite repeated objections from the local community. The police only appear to get interested after the damage is done and generally waive off-licence applications and renewals. Waive off-licence applications and renewals through saying there's no evidence of good order issues in this area. Regarding the Kingsford store back in 2015, community objectors asked for the alcohol to at least be removed from display behind the counter. They also raised concern about the sale of cigarettes and the long trading hours to 10 p.m. every night. On one level, this is a law and order issue, but so far no one has bothered to look at some of the underlying issues, particularly in an area flooded with liquor outlets and with high rates of poverty and overcrowding. Thank you for your feedback. You can text us on 2101 and email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. 5:27. Foreign dairy workers have been leaving the country seeking greener pastures, in Australia and Canada, and leaving some farmers struggling to fill the gap. Now, last month the government announced a one-off visa allowing about 4,000 South Island immigrants a pathway to residence. However, the dairy industry says that's too late for many workers who've simply given up and left the country. Tom Fairley reports.
Southland dairy farmer and share milker John Breach says with the new season starting in 2 weeks, he knows many farmers who are still desperately looking for workers.
In Southland there's certainly been a drop overall and people are applying for jobs. A drop in foreigners applying, but a huge drop in Kiwis applying. There seems to be no one applying down here for jobs at the moment.
Andrew Hoggard from Federated Farmers says the number of foreign workers applying for jobs has dropped in the last year. One job he advertised got 2 overseas applicants and about 20 New Zealanders. He says normally there are 3 foreigners applying for every local. Mr Hoggard says immigration changes like removing herd managers from the skills shortage list last year has left some looking elsewhere.
Perhaps the changes we've made has sort of discouraged migrants from looking to New Zealand because they don't see it as stable. They've only got the 1-year visas, whereas Australia, Canada are probably offering longer visa terms. So that's where they're looking.
John Breach says if farmers can't find staff, it'll have a huge effect, especially on existing workers who have to work longer hours. He says a once large international labour pool has bled people who found it more difficult to get residency or renew work permits.
I mean, the Philippine, labour force has certainly been huge down here, but we have lost a lot. We've lost over 300 Filipinos in the last 2 years. And that's mostly to Australia and Canada. So probably the Philippines has been and gone for us down here.
Mr Breach says the one-off visa pathway for South Island migrant workers to become residents is going to help. RNZ team leader for Southland and South Otago, Richard Kite, says data he's got shows the number of new migrants in the industry has fallen from over 800 in 2015 to 550 last year.
One of the key things is that we can, retain this quality migrant staff that we've got to actually maintain what we've got, and then just the processes for bringing staff in is probably where we need to make sure that we still can bring in the skilled people we need from wherever.
Catherine Poulter recruits for the dairy industry and is also a licensed immigration advisor. She says there's a shortage globally, but more needs to be done to keep migrant workers here.
The immigration policy has to be more stable so that any migrant contemplating coming into New Zealand knows or has an idea of what might happen to their immigration status once they're here. The proposal is that after 3 years, then the time will be up and they will be sent home. Except they won't go home. They'll be going somewhere else.
Ms Poulter says the numbers applying for listed jobs from overseas are already down, and she knows of several who have jumped ship to Australia, where it's easier to get residency. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Coming up on Checkpoint, the Crusaders rugby franchise says the city will miss out on test matches if construction of a new covered stadium is delayed until 2022. Andrew Little flags possible changes to the point system designed to encourage more immigrants to settle in the regions. A 6-night holiday, roaming on, the bill $31,000. That's the roaming bill, and more on this loss of vision in Southland after long delays for follow-up eye appointments, plus Nona with business. But before all of that, the headlines with Katrina.
The detective leading a squad trying to stop a spate of violent robberies in Auckland has made an impassioned plea for help from the families of the offenders. A man is recovering after being beaten and held at knife point in the latest attack at a Mangere dairy on Tuesday. Detective Inspector Fa'amanua Va'alua says that the offenders are gutless imbeciles and cowards, and if people suspect family members are involved, they should try to stop them. The police have made 68 arrests for aggravated robbery in Auckland since February. Firefighters have put out a fire that sent black smoke billowing from the top of a high-rise building in central Auckland this afternoon. The fire service says construction workers renovating a 21-storey building on the corner of Queen Street and Merrill Drive were cutting into a metal box on the roof when they saw smoke coming out from it. Everyone who was in the building has been accounted for. A coroner has found that a West Auckland teenager punched at a rugby training session had an underlying heart problem and died when the stress of the assault induced a heart attack. Stephen Dudley died in June 2013 after 2 brothers he went to school with attacked him. The Immigration Minister says the point system that encourages migrants to settle and work in the regions is attracting hundreds of people. The Labour Party says it should be reviewed because migrants are moving to Auckland as soon as their year is up. Michael Woodhouse says hundreds of migrants are moving to the regions and Labour's anecdotal evidence isn't correct. Edgecombe families whose homes were flooded will be able to apply for portable cabins to be set up on their own land. The government says about 30 temporary homes will be set up at the Whakatane Holiday Park or, where suitable, next to the houses being repaired. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. We'll have more on immigration very shortly, but first, Nona is on the other side of me with business news. Hi, Nona. Consumer confidence in New Zealand has risen to a level not seen since before the GFC, the global financial crisis, in 2008. What's driving that?
Some very good positive indicators. I mean, we have a low inflation environment still, even though it's moved up a little bit. Low unemployment rate, 4.9% in the last quarter, and lots of jobs available. So overall, those are the things that underpin people's confidence, and so it's quite high. It rose to 123.9 in May. That compares to 121.7 now, and historic average is 119. So it's above, an average, and it's quite high. And there's really no sign of it coming down. We've been seeing some global volatility. That's affecting the Australian market much more than it is in New Zealand. The chief economist at the RNZ that pulls together this report every month was, noted that difference. He said it could change because there's been so much volatility going on over in Washington, as we've been reporting. So far, that hasn't filtered through to New Zealand. There are some risks, of course. I mean, housing prices, rising interest rates, these types of things. But meanwhile, not so much. The consumers, it's just pointing to a very strong economy.
No, you talked about the volatility in Washington. There was the Trump bump, wasn't there? Wall Street. I mean, at first, Wall Street, there was a considerable trepidation around a Trump presidency. Then suddenly Wall Street said, we like this. But it's tanked this week, hasn't it? What happened overnight?
Yeah, overnight we saw some weakness, of course, in the U.S. The U.S. dollar has fallen to a 6-month low. Now, that's sort of the low that it was before Donald Trump became the front runner. That was back in November, and he won the election. Since then, though, all the gains that the Trump bump, as they call it, is gone. And I guess the markets are concerned that the big policies that he was talking about, tax reform, all these types of things, might not come to fruition. And so the market's coming back a little bit. We saw the Dow Jones index it fell just under 2%, which is a really big, large fall. I think it's the largest one in a year, perhaps.
Single day fall, yeah.
Yeah. NASDAQ was also lower, as well as the S&P 500. So over in Asia, that negative sentiment is carried through. Australia too. We're not doing quite so badly as Australia. Our market ended down 0.7%, down 51 points to 7,372. The dollar gained a little bit against the US dollar at 69.3, but against the Australian and the British pence was really hardly changed at all. A little bit down on the Australian, 92.8, and the British pence steady at 53.4.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. The author of a report on eye services in Southern, we covered this at length last night, is surprised more patients didn't lose their vision, waiting for follow-up eye appointments. An independent review released yesterday found 14 patients suffered major or moderate loss of vision because of delayed follow-up appointments in Dunedin and Invercargill during the 15 months to last October. Eye specialist James Stewart told our health correspondent Karen Brown he was surprised it wasn't worse.
People were waiting huge amounts of time there, and I'm not surprised at all. I mean, this is why we see people in a timely way if they've got glaucoma or macular degeneration or whatever. I guess when I went down to Dunedin, I expected the cases to be all involving macular degeneration, and I thought, well, the Avastin service probably is not managing to cope with the workload. But the striking thing really was the wide range of different eye conditions, plus the 2 patients with cancer. I guess what happens is that when you're struggling, people do recognise that the Avastin patients really do need to be seen soon, but then the other patients that don't need to be seen quite so soon get squeezed out.
Obviously, this was devastating. You make that point to the patients, but the clinicians were clearly in a difficult situation too.
Over the years, they found this very stressful and very upsetting because they, in particular in Dunedin, they tried to alert management that there was a problem using every available means. They spoke directly to the senior managers. They had a day trying to look at ways of coping with the increasing workload. They flagged this as being clinical risk. And the trouble is that nothing happened until there were these serious adverse events and media coverage of them. One of the big lessons from our review is that somehow, and I don't think this is just Southern DHB, but I think there is this problem that all DHBs are under huge financial constraints. Doctors are forever wanting more money, new instruments, more staff, and somehow they've got to be able to pick out when there is a real issue from perhaps a lower priority issue. And this is all about stopping people go blind. We have these effective treatments that are not particularly expensive, but they do require a certain number of clinic rooms to see the patients and a certain number of staff, doctors and nurses and optometrists to do the clinic reviews. But if we have adequate capacity, we can see people and stop them going blind. And I think for pretty much everyone, that would be considered a priority.
That's Dr. James Stewart talking to Karen Brown, of course. Dr. James Stewart says there are nationwide backlogs and better monitoring is needed to manage people with chronic eye disease. We'd really like to hear from you if you are on one of those backlogs. It doesn't matter where you are in New Zealand. You don't have to be in Southland or Otago. please get in touch. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We won't read the email out, but we will give you a call off the record at first. Checkpoint@radionz.co.nz if you are part of those backlogs. It's, well, approaching 20 to 6. Would you invite 20 people for dinner if you didn't have 20 chairs? Labor says that's the situation facing New Zealand's cities as migrants head to Auckland as soon as they can, even if they've initially settled elsewhere. Labor leader Andrew Little says the point system that encourages people to settle and work in the regions is partly to blame for the problem, and if Labor wins the election, it will review the policy. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
2 years ago, the government started giving immigrants with a job offer in the regions triple bonus points on the condition they stay there for at least a year. It was to help relieve the pressure on Auckland and to give the regions a boost. But in a pre-budget speech in Wellington this morning, Andrew Little said it was having the opposite effect.
It led to a bit of an increase in those settling in Hamilton who would then work in Auckland. So the requirement was they had to reside in a place other than Auckland for a year. So we also knew the other behaviour was that as they passed through Auckland, they were buying a property, going and settling somewhere else, and they'd come back within a year.
Labor has already said it would cut work visas and reduce the number of student visas in the party's formal immigration policy, which will be announced in the next few weeks. Mr Little says cutting migrant numbers is essential for New Zealand's quality of life. He says while the country was built on immigration, it is now struggling to cope with the numbers arriving. Andrew Little says it will take more than simply requiring migrants to live in the regions.
Trying to put on more restrictions to manacle people to different parts of New Zealand is almost certainly in breach of international obligations we have to maintain freedom of movement. To genuinely encourage new arrivals to go to different parts of New Zealand, you need the right opportunities in different parts of New Zealand.
But the Immigration Minister, Michael Woodhouse, says several hundred people have come into New Zealand off the back of that point system, and he doesn't think migrants are abusing it by moving to Auckland when their time is up.
There is absolutely no evidence that that's occurring, and indeed quite the opposite. There could be anecdotal evidence that I see of recent migrants moving out of Auckland and coming down to the South Island where I live. That's an anecdote. It's no less anecdotal than what Mr Little is saying.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters supports the point system and says migrants should be made to stay in the regions for longer before they skirt off to the cities.
We would give serious increased points for migrants to go to the regions for 5 years, knowing full well that once they get established there, they're very unlikely to leave. That's what Canada has done to try and address their problem, and we should have done that a long time ago.
The Southland president of Federated Farmers, Alan Baird, says migrants are increasingly being employed on farms because of a major skills shortage, but he's worried about the constant tinkering to immigration rules by different governments.
It's just been an ongoing pressure point. We understand that government wants to encourage industries to lock their own needs with labour and training. And so the dairy industry is mindful of that and is working quite hard to be able to create pathways where young Kiwis can start in the industry and work their way forward. But in the short term, we've got the concern that farms need labour now, and south particularly with low unemployment.
The Labour leader says there are some regions who need more migrants, but the larger problem is the pressure they're placing on infrastructure in the cities. He says no one would invite 20 people over for dinner if they didn't have 20 chairs for them to sit on, and right now the country's cities don't have enough chairs. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
This next story may sound like a sports story, but it's very much the story of a city too. The head of the Crusaders, which is of course Canterbury's Super 18 rugby franchise, is calling for, and of course the top of the South Island, is calling for a large covered stadium to be built in the middle of Christchurch as a matter of urgency. But an economics lecturer says the business case for such a stadium in the middle of Christchurch simply doesn't stack up. Conan Young reports.
The Christchurch City Council has earmarked $250 million towards the stadium, but has pushed the start of construction out to 2022 due to its tight financial situation. The Crusaders' chief executive, Hamish Riak, says the city cannot wait until then.
The city is missing out on having a venue that its people can enjoy, as opposed to the narrow view that, rugby's suffering because of it. Of course, we're part of the story, but in the end, this is a key part of a city's infrastructure.
And he says anything smaller than a 30,000-seat covered stadium runs the risk of the city missing out on test matches.
The New Zealand Rugby Union and the British and Irish Lions have choices, so they're playing them in the big venues. If the city decides to have a smaller, bespoke venue, we'll clearly make the most of it and we'll get on with it. But one of the consequences, absolutely, will be you won't get events that might have come here if it was bigger.
However, Massey University economics lecturer Sam Richardson says claims that new stadiums bring wider economic benefits through extra visitors don't stack up. That is because most of those turning up at the gates are locals who would have spent their money in the city anyway.
The construction sector, for instance, does experience a short-term increase in employment. But if you're going to spend $250 million on increasing employment in the construction sector, well, then is that a particularly strong argument? I think most people will be more comfortable with saying, well, if we're going to spend that much money, we'd better see something actually flowing into the economy.
Instead of calling it a stadium, both the council and the government now refer to the development as a multi-use events facility, denoting their wish to see it include hotels, offices and hospitality space. This, they say, will help it turn a buck day in, day out, outside of the big events such as concerts and All Blacks tests. Sam Richardson says the same claims were made for Dunedin's covered Forsyth Bar Stadium, but all it does is move the economic benefits from one part of the city to another.
In as much as you can say, oh yes, we plan to bring in a certain amount of conference revenue or commercial space, that is in many respects diverted from elsewhere in the city. So it has a negative impact potentially on other parts of the city.
Jerry Brownlee's replacement as Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Nikki Wagner, maintains that if the city wants to attract large events, then it will need a top-class facility, and she'd like to see one that has a roof.
I think it makes it a much more attractive thing to book. We know that if you've got something like a singer or a concert coming, you have to pay a significant amount of insurance against rainy days if you haven't got a cover. So I think certainly if you're investing a large amount of money, you've got to look at it.
The Mayor Leanne Dalzell declined to comment ahead of the completion of a pre-feasibility study into the stadium, due at the end of July. In Ōtautahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young Tēnei.
And with that pre-feasibility study due out in the not too distant future, we're going to keep looking at this. We would love your feedback from Christchurch. Do email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz or text us 2101. Obviously, this is an ongoing story. Let's go to Bermuda now and the America's Cup with Team New Zealand under repair following its collision with Britain's Ben Ainslie Racing, BAR. Not that today was racing weather any day. Anyway, with a lack of wind keeping all the teams off the water, but Team New Zealand couldn't have gone out if they wanted to. The Louis Vuitton qualifying series begins a week on Saturday. New Zealand is a little battered, still tweaking and wants more practice time on the water. But as we'll hear later, tweaking this late is a deliberate move. The team's CEO, Grant Dalton, says there's much more pressure for the Louis Vuitton this time than there was at the same time in San Francisco, and perhaps the Ben Ainslie boat, hitting them from behind yesterday, is an example of that pressure playing out.
Well, it's a campaign that's been set up around Ben, and Ben is the most decorated Olympic sailing medalist of all time. He's won 4 golds and a silver. I mean, he's amazing. And we know Ben very well, and the reason for that is he worked for Team New Zealand for the Valencia campaign as the backup to Dean. So he was with us for 3 years, so we know him really well, and he's a good guy. But we also know that he can be, he just sometimes, as I said, red mist or brain explosion or whatever, and he missed time. That was one of those things. He's under a lot of pressure. It's a very royal campaign with the Duke and Duchess and all of that, and they're spending, a report of their words, £100 million. I mean, that is a lot of money for one of these campaigns in anybody's terms. So it's just, they are having speed problems. I don't think that's, being unreasonable to Ben. I think he would say exactly the same. And I just saw a missed time that could be a result of all of that, and maybe that's an overread. It was just one of those things.
Grant, if we look at the Louis Vuitton, and for people who don't know what that is, it's the Challenger Series. So the winner gets to race Oracle for the America's Cup. The early form suggests, I think, the contenders are you, obviously, Artemis, the Swedish team, SoftBank, the Japanese team under Dean Barker. The Brits a wee way back, not because of skill but speed, I think, and the French look to be a little bit off the pace. You owned the Louis Vuitton in San Francisco. I think from memory you only lost one race. Are you in that kind of position now?
Well, no, because we've got a lot to do still, and I think. Well, I don't think I know. One of the lessons from San Francisco, and it's well reported, was that I don't know we peaked too early, but we just had nothing left. We had no development left. We'd finish our development cycle. So we're trying to run, and it's a pretty ragged edge, to be fair, a campaign this time between developing and never stopping, but still going racing and trying to be reliable. And a few of those things don't actually, like each other. Reliability and development often don't go well together. So you could easily lose. I mean, I don't mean to be unfair to the French, but they would say themselves, they're off the pace. Those are must-win races. You cannot give an easy race to the French because you broke down. And the whole thing could hinge around there was a classic example, and Chris Dixon knows better than me, in Valencia, where he lost through a problem to the Chinese, and who were slow, and it became a defining moment for that campaign because it pitched him against the wrong team in the semi-finals and he got knocked out. So the French and Ben are probably a little bit, off, but I don't think you can draw a line anywhere between Artemis, say, ourselves, and SoftBank. And in SoftBank you have Oracle. I mean, Oracle, you have SoftBank. They're exactly the same. Their compounds aren't even apart. They're the same, basically, joined buildings, and one is the same as the other. So they help each other. I mean, SoftBank's purpose in life is to help the defender hold on to the cup. It sounds weird, but that's how it's working. So I rate them because of the technology of Oracle.
Grant, I want to talk about the sort of balancing act. So you peaked too soon in San Francisco, and in Bermuda you want to constantly tweak and make yourself faster, but also, of course, you have to stay on the water because you don't want to lose to a team you should beat. So that's pretty precarious, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a balancing act that I think probably you find in high-level motor racing teams, particularly probably Formula One, where they're bringing upgrades in all the time, but they've still got to go racing every 2 weeks in the Formula One season. So people often make the comparison with F1 with what we do, and I've always thought, well, we're not exactly F1. They spend $500 million a year and have 500 people. But these boats are more, and these campaigns this time are more that way than they've ever been. And that's the advancements of technology.
I know it's not quite like Formula One in terms of costs, but boy, oh boy, as everyone knows, there is a lot of money in these teams. And I'm just wondering about the kind of pressure that you are beginning to feel now, because 4 teams are going home, and that's before the America's Cup. Are you feeling real pressure?
I think there's a lot more pressure this time than San Francisco at this stage. At this stage of San Francisco, we really had no handle on Oracle. We had no idea. We hadn't even started the Louis Vuitton that we were always going to win because Artemis had crashed and wasn't up to anything. And Luna Rossa was our other boat. So we kind of knew where that was before we developed. So I didn't feel any pressure at that stage at all. And it wasn't really until we got into the Cup itself that the pressure came on. At this point in this time, there are very good teams, and they're all good. But in particularly Artemis and the Japanese team, and BAR could come out yet with new appendages that could be really quick. So it's different pressure, and we're also under time pressure more than ever before in a campaign that I've been in, and that's a deliberate move to try and mix the deck up, try and learn the lessons of the past, and try and keep the development going as long as we possibly can to the very edge that we believe we can still be reliable and not have left anything on the table.
Grant Dalton speaking earlier from Bermuda. Time for a Kit Kat? Apparently not. Nestlé has lost the latest round of its long-running legal battle with rival Cadbury to trademark what it says is the iconic shape of its 4-fingered Kit Kat bar. In Britain, the Court of Appeal has ruled that the design of the bar has no inherent distinctiveness. The BBC's Emma Simpson with the story.
Kit Kat being what it is and me being what I am, we seem to come together quite natural this time of the morning. Nestle's been making this famous four-fingered bar since 1935.
I always say, have a break, have a Kit Kat.
But today, 3 judges gave the company 2 fingers over its latest legal attempt to secure trademark status for its shape. This is the latest twist in Nestle's long-running legal feud with Cadbury. Cadbury objected to Nestle's argument that the shape of the Kit Kat was iconic and should be protected by law. Today, the Court of Appeal ruled in favour of Cadbury, dismissing the claim. So how difficult is it to secure a monopoly for the shape of a product? Many years ago, Coca-Cola managed to protect its instantly recognisable glass bottle. Toblerone bars are also registered. How about Wall's Viennetta ice cream? A court ruled its creamy whirl just wasn't distinctive enough. So why do these big brands go to so much expense and bother fighting these cases in court? Sally Britton is an intellectual property lawyer at Mishcon de Rea.
There's a lot at stake. Obviously, there's a big commercial benefit in having a registered trademark. It's much easier to push away copycats and keep your unique place in the market.
No wonder then that Nestle said it was disappointed by the ruling. It's now considering whether to take this battle all the way to the Supreme Court.
A Christchurch couple has holiday memories they'll never forget after being stung with $30,000 in roaming charges. Their mobile provider says Emma and Stephen Cliff were repeatedly warned of the increasing charges. But the couple denies this and say the first phone call they received in Rarotonga was when the bill had reached $24,000. Bridget Burke reports.
Sunshine, relaxation and an end-of-summer luxury escape. It was just what Emma and Stephen Cliff thought they needed, but instead of spending $5,500 on the 6-night break, they've been left more than $40,000 out of pocket.
We had a couple of windy days. It's obviously flicked off our Wi-Fi without realising, and because we're not technically that savvy, we still had our data roaming on, and it's automatically gone onto that without us realising.
That's right, $40,000 for a 6-night stay in Rarotonga. You see, Emma and Stephen run a business in Christchurch, and their phone account is through a loyalty program with Placemakers, and Spark is the provider. The couple took 2 phones and an iPad on holiday, and their hotel had Wi-Fi, so the couple thought nothing of it when the weather turned bad.
My husband watched 2 movies, and that was Facebook probably a couple of times, Messenger to family, and that's probably it. But it works out roughly to be near close to $5,000 a day, what we were charged.
Mrs. Cliff's account for her Rarotonga trip was more than $27,000. Add GST, and the final bill was $31,234, 30 times more than her normal monthly account. That worked out at roughly $1,500 per gigabyte of data the Cliffs used. She says Spark has refused to take her calls, and she has queried the bill with Placemakers. Placemakers declined to be interviewed, but in a statement told Checkpoint that customers who belong to the loyalty program are aware of the data caps.
Spark sent the customer 5 text messages warning about data usage. In addition, a representative from Placemakers called the customer and left a voicemail warning about the high data usage.
Did you get any warning about the fact that you were using data?
We got, I got 2 text messages on my phone. One was up to $500, and then I got one straight away up saying it was at $1,500. And then same day we got a phone call saying turn our data off. It was up to $24,000.
How long on Facebook?
Oh, not long at all. No. I wasn't scrolling through. I probably posted a picture and that was about it.
Spark would also not be interviewed, but said it has to negotiate roaming charges with local providers, in this case telcos in Rarotonga, and there is an international transit charge to return the data to New Zealand. In a statement it told us,
"We did try to see what we could do to reduce the bill, but we actually lost money on it to begin with."
Spark reiterated 3 automated messages and 2 manual text messages were sent to Emma to confirm that they intended to be using the data they were using. Craig Young is the chief executive of the Telecommunications Users Association. He says the 18 gigabytes the couples used isn't a lot, and there may have been some updating going on in the devices that the Cliffs weren't aware of.
The best advice is to educate yourself before you go and really think about, do you need to use it when you're away?
If you don't need to use it, well then turn mobile roaming off, because that's when you're going to get charged. And turn it off before you leave New Zealand so that the device has no chance to actually hook up to any network when you arrive at the other end.
Mrs Cliff says she has her own advice for people thinking of using their mobile devices overseas.
Make sure you have kept and thoroughly investigate what it's going to cost you when you're over there for roaming, or buy something local, buy a card locally. The holidays to Rarotonga initially cost us $5,500. With the bill on top, we're looking into the 40,000s. We've been to Fiji a few times and we never had any trouble, so we just honestly didn't think that would be any different.
Mrs Cliff says she's taken legal advice and is refusing to pay the bill. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Lots of feedback on the stadium in Christchurch. What a huge waste of money, Larkin says. When I think about what could be done with $250 million, I'm horrified at the thought of spending that much money on a stadium. Thank you all for your feedback. Coming up to the news at 6 o'clock, you are with Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The detective leading a squad trying to stop a spate of aggravated robberies in Auckland has made an impassioned plea for help from the families of offenders. A Mangere dairy worker is recovering after being beaten and held at knife point in the latest attack on Tuesday. Rowan Quinn reports.
Detective Inspector Whaawailua says the latest offenders are gutless imbeciles and cowards, but he's calling out their families, some of whom he says may be living off the proceeds of the stolen cigarettes and alcohol. Mr Whaawailua says the police alone can't stop the robberies, and if people suspect family members are involved, they should try to stop them. He says several promising phone calls have been received since CCTV footage of the Mangere robbers was released earlier today. I Tamaki Makaurau, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
A Southland share milker says 300 Filipino dairy farm workers have left Southland in the past 2 years after trying and failing to get residency. Last month, the government announced a one-off visa allowing about 4,000 long-term South Island immigrants a pathway to become residents. John Breach says that's come too late for the many who've already decided to try their luck elsewhere.
The Philippine, labour force has certainly been huge down here, but we have lost a lot. We've lost over 300 Filipinos in the last 2 years, and that's mostly to Australia and Canada. So probably the Philippines has been and gone for us down here.
John Breach says fewer people are applying for jobs and some farmers are struggling to fill positions. Immigration New Zealand figures show the dairy industry had 350 fewer work visas last year than the year before. Representatives from both sides of the United States Congress are welcoming the appointment of a special prosecutor to take over the inquiry into alleged Russian interference in last year's election. The Justice Department has appointed a former FBI director, Robert Mueller, to lead the inquiry, which will look into alleged ties between President Donald Trump's campaign team and Russia. Mr Trump says he expects the inquiry will find no evidence of collusion and he'll carry on representing the interests of the American people.
We are setting the stage right now for many, many more things to come. And the people understand what I'm doing, and that's the most important thing. I didn't get elected to serve the Washington media or special interests. I got elected to serve the forgotten men and women of our country, and that's what I'm doing.
President Donald Trump. Public health teams have begun visiting 5 Dunedin primary schools where raised levels of lead have been found. GNS Science found the lead in soil samples taken last year. The schools are Bathgate Park, George Street Normal, Mornington, North East Valley and Opoho. A medical officer of health, Marion Poor, says the highest level is 595 milligrams per kilogram of soil, which is above the recommended government standard for residential gardens but below that for public parks. She says the health risk is low.
We're not surprised by these findings. The levels in the schools themselves are at the lower end of the spectrum, and so we're taking a conservative and precautionary approach to managing this.
Marion Poor says the schools in question have been warned. The fire at the top of a high-rise building in central Auckland has been put out. Emergency services were called to the 21-storey building on the corner of Queen Street and Merrill Drive when black smoke billowed from it this afternoon. The fire service says construction workers doing renovation work on the roof cut into a metal box and smoke started coming out from the sides. Assistant Fire Commander Mike Shaw says firefighters had to run hoses up to the floors to put out the blaze because the building's internal water supply wasn't working. Everyone who was in the building has been safely accounted for. The Environment Court has upheld the decision of Bay of Plenty Regional Council commissioners to allow the Rena wreck to stay on Astrolabe Reef. Last year, the ship's owner was given resource consent to leave what's left of it on the site where it was grounded in 2011. This was appealed against by Ngaita Hapu from Motiti Island. The court has now granted consents for the abandonment of the vessel and the discharge of contaminants from it. The owners are required to consult with the Regional Council about the conditions of those consents. The Transport Minister says the upgrading of the Littleton Tunnel is expected to get underway in the coming weeks. Simon Bridges says more than $28 million has been spent on installing a fire deluge system, the largest project undertaken at the tunnel since it was opened in 1964. He says the work will improve safety and make lengthy closures of the tunnel less likely. It's expected to be completed by the end of next year. It's 6:05. To sport, the British skipper whose boat accidentally rammed Team New Zealand during an America's Cup practice race in Bermuda has apologised. Team New Zealand will be unable to race for 3 days because of the metre-long dent in their boat, and Ben Ainsley says he's sorry for his mistake.
Certainly apologies from me. The weather at the moment is very light wind, so hopefully Team New Zealand don't lose too much time out on the water, out on the race course with their preparations.
Ben Ainsley. The Black Caps are hoping to go unbeaten in the Irish Tri-Series now that they've won their second game against Bangladesh. Set 258 to win, the New Zealanders reached the victory target with 15 balls remaining. It's their second win of the series following their opening win over the hosts. Their next game is against Ireland on Sunday night. Bowler Jimmy Neesham says yesterday's win has been a boost for the team, which was without some key players.
Our eyes are certainly focused on that trophy over there rather than the one that's in a month's time. We want to go through this tournament unbeaten, that's certainly the aim for us, but yeah, the only way to do that is to take things one game at a time, and we'll certainly be looking to that game on, I think it's Sunday, to continue that run.
Jimmy Neesham. And Huddersfield are just one win away from a place in English football's Premier League after reaching the Championship playoff final against Reading. Huddersfield were last in the top flight in 1972. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, saving Queensland's koalas from VD because chlamydia is rife. No one knows how they got it, but Peter Timms is working on a vaccine to stop it. We have a window on the world of crime solving using food. You might like to have your dinner first. And this week's cultural ambassador, our technophile Paul Berrington, remembers when jungle hit the dance floor, despite the fact it was near impossible to dance to, on nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow now, and all of the North Island except Wellington and southern Wairarapa. A few showers clearing from Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and northern Wairarapa this evening. Showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow morning. Wellington and southern Wairarapa cloudy, a period of rain overnight tonight and again tomorrow night. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine, but a period of rain tonight and again tomorrow night with snow above 400 metres. Westland and Buller, rain spreading north this evening, followed by showers, some heavy with snow above 600 metres, clearing tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, rain developing by evening, followed by showers, some possibly heavy. Snow lowering to 600 metres tonight and to low levels later tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, periods of rain, possibly heavy and thundery, especially overnight tonight. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina. We return now to the aggravated robbery which occurred at the Kingsford Superette in Mangere on Tuesday evening. Police have today released CCTV footage of what took place and described it very bluntly. Now, the man in the footage is 24-year-old Vikas Singh. He has his back turned to the shop's door and is stacking shelves at 7:30 on Tuesday night when 4 masked men, 2 armed with machetes, stormed in. He asked for his face not to be shown. He's fearful of retribution, but here is Vikas describing what happened.
They hit me on my head, and after that I was totally unconscious and fell down on the floor. So after that, I don't know, they punching on my face and nose, but I don't remember. But after a few minutes, I just got up and I see the guy put a knife on my neck, and they just asking for the money.
Now, you heard Vikas say a few minutes later, it was actually just seconds. The entire attack was over in less than 30, 28 to be precise. Vikas has been in New Zealand for 3 years with his brother, and after Tuesday's attack, he says he really doesn't feel safe here.
I think this is totally unsafe, now New Zealand going to be unsafe. Before coming, I heard that New Zealand is a very peaceful country. But now the picture is different,
Your world has been shattered, essentially.
Yeah.
Today, when they released the CCTV footage, police also said since February they've arrested 68 people for aggravated robbery in Auckland. Some cases are still under investigation. Normally the police are pretty straight in their language, but at a media conference at the Manukau police station this afternoon, Detective Inspector Fa'amanuia Va'alua let rip. We played you some of the Detective Inspector earlier. Afterwards I spoke to him about what took place at the Kingsford Superettes.
It was totally unnecessary. You've got a shop attendant, and you've got a woman in there, and we've got 4 people outnumbering the 2 occupants, and yet they feel the need to bully, violently throw the male victim around, and then the actions of the heavy-set offender, wrapping his arm around in a choker hold and then putting the knife up to his throat, and he actually cut him. There was an amount of blood on the floor. So blood has been spilt. Hence why it's sickening. It's like straight out of the movies. So it's despicable. It's unacceptable in our society. But the reason why the tone that's coming from me is simply because of the prevalence of it. These young people don't seem to have any more respect for society, any more respect for people who are trying to earn a living. So the message from police is for these people to get to this stage, where are their families? Where's the mother and the father? And how did they get to this stage? And as a police response that they can only do is identify the perpetrator, put them before the courts, and have them prosecuted. We need families to be holding their people to account, families to be accountable. We need to remind ourselves of the morals, the respect, the mana. There's the Pacific. They all hail from very good ancestors, and some of them with chiefly titles. It's embarrassing. It's a shame that some of the surnames that I recognise in the arrest books and in the occurrences are titles so highly respected in Samoa. But that goes for all the Pacific Islands. And then I ask about the iwi, the mana of the Māori that we are really focusing on at the moment. I think police are doing so much with our MPES, which is our Māori Pacific Ethnic Services. We do really well, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need the support of the families. We need the support of the community. And the community, if you anecdotal evidence talking to retailers of dairies and liquor stores, they're very happy with what the police are doing. But the police, we do not want to keep investigating and locking people up, because we want our arrest rates and our workload reduced, and that can only happen if these things don't happen in the first place.
I think everyone who sees this footage will be shocked by it. And as you say, there have been so many similar incidents, and it does speak to a big problem. And you are a detective inspector. You're not a politician, you're not a sociologist, you're not an academic who has some insight into what is creating these kids. But what is going wrong that this kind of thing is happening? I mean, And I'm not saying that it would make more sense if the value was greater, but they're stealing a few cigarettes, not even much money. And the violence seems so casual and so brutal. What the hell is happening?
Yes. I think earlier today in a meeting I had with some service station managers, we find ourselves in a dichotomy with the price of cigarettes being increased because, and in some way towards deterring smokers. But what it does at the opposite end is make cigarettes worth gold. If my tone comes across as a bit harsh, it's only because I feel for the victims. I feel for the male victim in that attack. It's unnecessary. It really is. It could have turned really nasty. A knife was put to him. He was cut. He was bleeding. Really? Do we ask the question? And where's the respect? It's too late when we have these people caught, prosecuted, and the family come over and seek restorative justice and asking for a forgiveness. We need to work so that we can tackle the situation and the issue well before then.
That's Detective Inspector Whaamanuia Va'aelua talking earlier this afternoon. It's 6:15, your checkpoint on RNZ. The coroner has recommended the school that Stephen Dudley attended should develop a CPR training program, and officials should form guidelines on the use of defibrillators. Stephen Dudley, who was 15, died in June 2013 after a pair of brothers he went to school with attacked him after a rugby training session. The two brothers were discharged without conviction a year later and have permanent name suppression. The coroner's report has found that Stephen Dudley had an underlying heart problem and died when the stress of the assault induced a heart attack. Coroner Gordon Matenga has recommended the school in question develop a CPR training program and says the Ministry of Education should form guidelines on the use of defibrillators. Our reporter Edward Gay asked John Munro, who represented one of the brothers who attacked Stephen, what he made of the report.
Look, in essence, Coroner Matenga took into account the two experts, Dr Morrow and Dr Thomas, and applied them to the circumstances of the death of Stephen Dudley and made his decision that the cause of death was from the physical assault, but I don't really have an opinion on that decision.
Can you tell me what the process for your client has been like going through this?
I think the any time where a person gives evidence in court is quite a harrowing time for any person, let alone a person who's a youth. So I know they found that quite difficult, as did the family, and they took a number of days off work to come and support their children, especially I think it came about over a year after the actual decision in the criminal case. So I imagine it was pretty difficult for them.
What do you make of the recommendations from Mr Matenga?
Any recommendations, I suppose, that potentially prevent something like this happening again have got to be good recommendations.
And I mean, even though CPR was carried out on Mr Dudley, Mr Matenga is recommending that all Year 9 students learn how to do CPR. I mean, that's got to be a good thing, not for cases just like this one. It'll have wider implications.
That's right. I understand a lot of schools do this already. It may not be a new thing for some schools, but you're right, it's got to be a good thing, even if it's not to prevent these sorts of incidents again.
John Munro talking to Edward Gay. Well, we heard from John Sopel, the BBC's John Sopel in Washington earlier in the program. The headlines and accusations just keep coming. But outside of Washington, are Donald Trump supporters starting to rethink their support for the US president? To recap, first there was the Washington Post report that the president had revealed classified intelligence information to the Russian foreign minister. Then came the New York Times saying he'd reportedly asked the ousted FBI head James Comey to shut down an investigation into ties between his national security advisor Michael Flynn and Russia. But it's all playing out against another political reality. Donald Trump's support base is, by all accounts, still behind him. To find that out, the BBC's Nada Tawfik visited the capital of country music, Nashville.
In Nashville, it's the twang of a guitar that moves this music city. And unlike Washington, politics is not the topic in the bars. In the capital of country music, the tunes belt out the concerns of the everyday American. Paying rent, finding love. And those who voted for Donald Trump brush off the image of a White House in crisis. They view the headlines as simply noise.
You cannot tell me that all these leaks and all these kinds of comments to the press that come through almost daily, almost hourly, are not because people are trying to subvert this president.
The near daily revelations, including how the president has possibly interfered with the investigations into his associates' ties to Russia, do not raise red flags with his voters.
Now, obviously we care whether or not he's colluding with Russians and trying to affect the election and those kind of substantive matters. And if real hard evidence comes out about that, then obviously we'll have to reassess. But in terms of Trump, Trump's doing exactly what he's done for the last year, and people love him for that.
When you speak to Donald Trump's most ardent supporters, their views on the man they elected have not changed. Instead, they are convinced that the constant leaks and revelations are part of a concerted effort to undermine his presidency.
But you make Russia the boogeyman.
Phil Valentine hosts a conservative talk show directed at those who do not trust the mainstream media. He says Donald Trump needs only to worry about delivering on his campaign promises.
If he doesn't cut taxes, if he doesn't lower the corporate rate, if he doesn't do the things that he said he was going to do during the campaign, then there's going to be trouble.
What has these hockey fans on pins and needles is whether Nashville's team will reach the Stanley Cup. But conservatives here have no fears about President Trump.
All the media are Democrats. They're all left-wingers. They don't want to see him do well. They don't want to see America do well. They just want to give America away.
The things they're saying about him and everything is total lie.
You know, the media most of the time blows things out of proportion. There's always two sides to the story.
There's no doubt that the president's approval rating is taking a hit, but there's no sign of an erosion of trust from his base. They feel empowered by his presidency and his defiance.
Isn't it extraordinary to get that take completely different from what we're hearing from Washington? Nera Tawfik with Trump supporters in Nashville. Nera's with the BBC, of course. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei has put its hand up as a potential buyer for Auckland Sport after the city's mayor reignited debate about its future. But Phil Goff has made it clear he wants the council-owned port to move from its downtown location, says the valuable land on it isn't for sale. All of this is still hypothetical and long-term. Still, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is saying, don't forget about us. Our reporter Sarah Robson has more.
Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei spokesman Ngārimu Blair says the iwi has raised the issue of the port with successive Auckland mayors over many years.
Leaders from Ngāti Whātua have put the case to each incoming mayor that yes, we have an historic grievance with how we lost control of the Waitemata and the seabed. However, our money is as good as anyone else's, and we would like to, if there is an opportunity, to purchase that seabed back.
Ngārimu Blair says the iwi is looking at setting up a consortium to do this, and they're open to options. He says they have already had early discussions with potential partners during the last few years, and they've mooted getting the New Zealand Super Fund as well as other iwi involved. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is hoping to put a more formal plan together over the next few weeks and wants to meet with Phil Goff.
We'll definitely look at any opportunity there, but strictly on a commercial basis. So we're not looking for the land to be handed back or returned as part of any treaty settlement. We're prepared to put our hands in our pocket.
There has been heated political, public and legal debate over the place Ports of Auckland occupies on the city's waterfront. Ngārimu Blair says the iwi also wants to see the waterfront better used.
We're saying the same thing that other people are saying, which is to give the public greater access to the water, to the Waitemata, to have more activities down there where the public can enjoy, where people can live, where people can work and where people can play.
Yesterday, Phil Goff told Checkpoint there was some value in separating the port operating company from the land.
If the ports decide to relocate out of Auckland, I'm not going to have the ports sell off the land to the highest commercial bidder in order to relocate, because that won't guarantee the cultural, environmental, social and economic outcomes that I want for Auckland.
In a statement today, Phil Goff says the port land isn't for sale and any decisions about the future of the port will be made by councillors. He says when the port is relocated, the land will be used by the council to create an iconic public space for Aucklanders. Mr Goff said that will be funded by some residential and commercial development, and he would be happy to discuss this with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. Neither the Ports of Auckland nor Auckland Council Investments Limited, the council's investment arm which owns and manages the port, would comment. For Checkpoint, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Australia's Deputy Tax Commissioner is expected to face charges over his possible involvement in a multi-million-dollar fraud syndicate. Michael Cranston is accused of using his position at the Taxation Office to access records at the request of his son Adam. Adam Cranston was one of 9 people arrested in raids in Sydney yesterday. The police allege the group defrauded the government and tax system of more than $160 million. The ABC's Stephanie Boris has the story.
Police swooped on a number of properties across Sydney, Wollongong and the Southern Highlands, seizing luxury cars, vintage wine, 2 planes, firearms, jewellery and $1 million in a safe deposit box. Police claim the items were bought with some of the $165 million taken from the taxation system. Australian Federal Police Deputy Commissioner Leanne Close says 9 people have been charged. The offences range from conspiracy to defraud the Commonwealth and money laundering.
It's certainly one of the most significant in terms of the numbers of conspirators, the amount of money involved.
The ages of the alleged offenders range from 24 to 47, both men and women. Among those charged, Adam Cranston. He's the son of Australian Taxation Office Deputy Commissioner Michael Cranston. AFP Deputy Commissioner Leanne Close says police are alleging Adam tried to use his dad to gain information from the ATO.
It appears that his son has asked him to access some information potentially. We don't believe that at this point that he had any knowledge of the actual conspiracy and the defrauding.
As a result, they have issued Michael Cranston with a court attendance notice in relation to his alleged abuse of his position as a public official. If found guilty, he could face up to 5 years in jail. Acting Commissioner of Taxation Andrew Mills says it doesn't appear that the ATO operations have been compromised.
I cannot overstate the seriousness of these matters. Australians must have a tax administration that they can trust, and the people of the ATO must be of the utmost integrity and good judgment. This is even more important for those in leadership positions.
The investigation took a total of 8 months. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says it serves as a warning to anyone trying to rort the system.
Nobody should imagine that they can escape our law enforcement agencies, no matter how high they may be in a government department, no matter how high they may be. They are being watched. We have zero tolerance for people who seek to defraud the Commonwealth of its revenue.
It was the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Ending that report from the ABC, Stephanie Boris. Over $160 million is alleged to have been defrauded. Quite extraordinary. Let's end Checkpoint tonight with another visit to Japan. We were there with Chris Bramwell before. A royal love story has renewed debate about the future of the country's monarchy. Princess Mako, the eldest granddaughter of Empress Akihito, has announced her engagement to a former university classmate, but he's a commoner. And to marry him, the princess has to give up her royal status. With more from Tokyo, here's the BBC's Laura Westbrook.
As the first grandchild of the Emperor of Japan, Princess Mako is used to posing for the cameras. But soon she will be giving up her royal status. The reason? Princess Mako is marrying Kei Komuro, who works in a Tokyo law firm and is what's known as a commoner. The couple met 5 years ago at university. The closest Kei Komuro came to royalty is he once starred as the Prince of the Sea in a campaign to promote tourism.
It is very nice to hear it because there is a lot of bad news.
I hope the couple makes one of the happiest families in Japan.
Unlike his granddaughter, Emperor Akihito was allowed to ascend the chrysanthemum throne despite having married the daughter of a wealthy businessman. His engagement nearly 60 years ago to Michiko Shoda shocked traditionalists. She was the first commoner to marry into the Japanese royal family. Akihito set out to modernize some of the old traditions, including insisting on bringing up their children themselves. But some traditions remain in place. Under current Japanese law, women cannot be imperial successors. So if Akihito were to retire, and lawmakers are considering legislation to allow this, Princess Mako cannot take his place. The news of this latest engagement has reignited the debate of whether to allow women to stay in the imperial family after marrying a commoner. It's a step Conservatives in the country fear moves towards allowing women to inherit the throne. Out of 19 royal family members, 14 are women. And so as another princess marries, the royal family continues to shrink.
That report from the BBC, we're getting horror roaming stories, 14k roaming from 2 degrees. They're on a cruise ship just going around New Zealand. Christchurch Stadium. On the subject of the new rugby stadium in Christchurch, why is it always the general public who are asked to pay when obviously there's such benefit financially for the players in the rugby union and the International Rugby Union? Could they not front up with some cash at some point? And as one of many beleaguered Christchurch ratepayers, I endorse the university researchers' caution about a new stadium. There are so many other immediate priorities. Apart from the City Council, we have at least 2 other government-sponsored agencies making big and costly decisions about our city and its future. My view is all decisions about Christchurch's future should now revert to the council. That's from Margaret Griffin. It's a long email, but actually we're going to look at some of the issues you raised there, Margaret. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A detective leading the squad trying to stop a spate of violent robberies in Auckland has made an impassioned plea for help from the families of offenders. A coroner has found that a West Auckland teenager punched at a rugby training session had an underlying heart problem and died when the stress of the assault induced a heart attack. A spectacular fire at the top of a high-rise building in central Auckland has been put out. Representatives from both sides of the US Congress are welcoming the appointment of a special prosecutor to take over the inquiry into alleged Russian interference in last year's election. A share milker says 300 Filipino dairy farm workers have left Southland in the past 2 years after failing to get residency before a new visa introduced last month. Public health teams have begun visiting 5 Dunedin primary schools where raised levels of lead have been found.